Last year they were 3-13-1. The Texans were one of the worst teams in the NFL, if not the worst team in the NFL. They had 3 quarterbacks start in the span of one season. They lost 9 games in a row, their worst losing streak since 2013. The thing though is that this problem hasn't been happening for only one season. It's been going on since 2020. They were constantly the bottom feeders of the NFL. But now, the Texans are 10-7 and have made their first playoff appearance since 2019. They have a young team with a lot of potential, and the Texans franchise has a promising future in front of them, and it's all thanks to one player, CJ Stroud. The Texans were a really bad team for 3 seasons. From 2020 up until 2023, they were consistently one of the worst teams in the league. Many of those problems came from really bad head coaches, bad draft selections, bad cap space. They were just a bad football team, plain and simple. In the Texans 2022 season, they were 2-13-1 going into week 18. And instead of tanking, Lovie Smith, the Texans head coach at the time who knew he was getting fired, won that game, ending their season 3-13-1 and dropping their draft selection from pick 1 to pick 2. Keep in mind, the number 1 overall pick was always going to be Bryce Young. So with the 2nd overall pick, CJ Stroud was drafted by the Texans. Which brings me to a question I want to ask. Would Bryce Young be doing as good as CJ if he got drafted by the Texans and vice versa? What do y'all think? Anyways, it's pretty known that when CJ got selected by the Texans, he kept pushing for them to draft Tank Dell in the 3rd round.
After he got drafted, I sent him congrats. And then I was like, tell him come get me. I told him tell him come get me and stuff like that. And then he was like, I got you.
And he was a steal because he and CJ would click from almost the very beginning. The Texans also made a trade to get Will Anderson Jr., an edge rusher with a lot of potential. But the draft wasn't the only good thing the Texans did in that offseason, because they also hired 49ers defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans as their new head coach, who, by the way, played with the Texans for 6 years, so you already know he had a strong bond with them. Oh, and probably the most important thing, the Texans had a pretty good O-line coming into 2023. The Texans did all they could for CJ Stroud to come in and do his thing. There wasn't any guarantee they were going to be good this season, but there sure was a lot of potential. But what CJ did this season, I don't even think the Texans expected it. In week 1 and 2, Stroud would look pretty good, throwing for 242 yards against the Ravens and 384 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Colts. CJ was playing good. But the Texans had started the season off with 2 losses. To be fair though, they played the Ravens in week 1, so I feel like CJ should get more credit for playing as well as he did against that Ravens defense. But week 9 versus the Buccaneers is when everyone heard his name, because in that game he would throw for 470 yards and 5 touchdowns and also led his team to a clutch game-winning drive. CJ played for most of the entire season, but he did miss a couple of games due to an injury in week 14. He came back as if nothing happened though, destroying the Titans on his game back. Up to now, I think the final regular season game against their divisional rivals, the Colts, has been the most important game for CJ, because if they won, the Texans would make the playoffs for the first time in years. This game was high stakes, but that didn't really affect CJ, because in just his first attempt of the night, he threw a 75-yard pass to Nico Collins and scored a touchdown. CJ led the Texans to winning the game 23-19 and clinching their first playoff spot in a long time. It's actually pretty crazy how much the Texans turned their team around in only 1 year, from 3-13-1 to 10-7. CJ ended the season with 4,108 yards, 23 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions. Something about CJ though is that he didn't throw interceptions very often. His first interception actually came all the way in week 6 against the Saints. CJ had a really good first season, no doubt, and I believe he should win Offensive Rookie of the Year. The only other true rookie that has a chance of winning is Puka. What Puka did is great, don't get me wrong, breaking the rookie reception and receiving yard record, but I just believe what CJ did is even greater. Being a rookie quarterback in the NFL is extremely hard, and what CJ did is just crazy, breaking all sorts of records not just for a rookie, but quarterbacks in general, putting up crazy numbers, making some really nice throws, and bringing his team from being the worst of the worst to serious contenders. Also, if CJ hadn't been injured for those 2 games, he would have easily broken the rookie passing record. I would even go as far as saying that CJ could be a contender for the MVP. He's 8th in the league in passing yards, and he's the only player in the top 10 that has played only 15 games. And you can also tell how much his team revolves around him. However, the only thing stopping CJ from being a strong contender for that award is that he's a little inconsistent. For example, against the 2-15 Panthers, he threw for 140 yards and 0 touchdowns. But then the next week against the 9-8 Buccaneers, he threw for 470 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then against the Jets, he threw for only 91 yards. But to be fair, all of his receivers were injured, and he also got concussed in that game. CJ Stroud has really high highs, but also some pretty low lows. But for the most part, he has been at a really good level. The Texans are going to face the Browns this weekend in the wild card, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm really looking forward to that game. CJ Stroud versus that powerhouse defense is going to be crazy. The Texans already faced the Browns a couple weeks ago, and they lost 36-22. But that was while CJ was injured. This revenge game could really show everyone how much of a game changer CJ truly is. CJ Stroud's impact on the Texans is undeniable. He is the biggest factor in why the Texans are good this season. To me, he is Defensive Rookie of the Year without a doubt. CJ Stroud is a great quarterback, but that's not the only good thing about him, because he's also a natural born leader. By the way, if you want to learn more about CJ's backstory, click on his video right here. What do y'all think about CJ though? Is he Defensive Rookie of the Year? Let me know in the comments.